"Ma'am, step back behind the line and wait outside." The voice came flat and certain, the way a young man's voice gets when he has decided a thing and does not intend to reconsider it. "Badged personnel only through this lane. If you're not on the access roster, you don't come in." Senior Airman Trevor Maddox was 22 years old, and the gate belonged to him. 0700. A pale sky, the color of gun oil, the main entry control point of an Air Force base coming awake in the cold, and the force protection condition sitting one notch higher than usual because a convoy package was staging within the hour. Cones out. The final denial barrier up. The tower manned. The whole apparatus of a base that took its front door seriously. And a woman on foot at the pedestrian lane. No vehicle, no badge, no name on the roster taped inside the shack. She stepped back, exactly to the line. Not a hand's width past it. She was maybe 50. Plain travel clothes, the kind a person wears on a long flight and a longer drive. A canvas bag over one shoulder. Nothing about her asked to be noticed. Her hair was pulled back loose. Her hands were quiet at her sides. She looked at the young man who had just ordered her to wait, and she did not argue, and she did not sigh, and she did not reach for a phone to call somebody who mattered. She simply waited. Badged airmen flowed past her through the lane. Common access cards flashed. The reader chirped its little green note. Boots on the cold concrete, the ordinary traffic of a base's morning, and the woman stood in the middle of it like a stone in a stream, and the stream went around her without touching her. He was good at his job, in the way that a young man is good at a job he has fully believed in and not yet been surprised by. He had the post orders memorized. He could recite the access categories asleep. Badge, roster, sponsor, or out. The world came in 4 boxes, and everyone he had ever met fit in one of them. The woman at the line fit in the last box. Out. There was no cruelty in that, and no real thought in it either. It was arithmetic, and his arithmetic had never once failed him, because he had never met a person the post orders could not sort. A staff sergeant went past and flashed a card and traded a nod with him, the small Freemasonry of people who belong. A civilian contractor badged through with a lunch cooler and a hard hat. 2 lieutenants, coffee in hand, laughing about something. Each of them fit a box. Each cleared the reader and vanished into the base, and none of them looked twice at the woman with the canvas bag and the inward-turned watch, because a person the gate has decided is nothing becomes, very quickly, invisible to everyone who belongs. That is the oldest trick in the woman's trade, though no one at the gate knew it yet. Not disguise, not a false name, just the willingness to be counted as nothing, and to wait inside that nothing, patient as winter, until the counting proved wrong. Maddox turned his back. Inside the guard shack, behind the glass, Chief Master Sergeant Corwin Hale watched her over the rim of a paper cup. 48 years old. 29 of them spent standing on gates exactly like this one, on 4 continents, in every weather a gate can suffer. He had turned away 10,000 people in his life. He knew every way a person handled being told no. The bluster, the wheedling, the phone held up like a badge, the slow leak of a temper that thought itself important. He had never seen anybody wait like that. She was not annoyed. That was the thing that snagged him. A person told to wait outside a gate they clearly expected to enter should be, at minimum, annoyed. She was not. She was patient the way a hunter is patient. Still, and awake, and entirely at ease with time. Rain somewhere. Not here. A different gate. A long way back. Black water sheeting off a barrier arm, and a younger woman's voice cutting through radio noise. Hold the line. Hold the line. And a name shouted once into the dark. Bannister. Then gone. The way a thing you have carried for 22 years. Surfaces and submerges in a single breath. Here." Now, the woman checked her watch. She wore it turned inward, the face against the pulse of her wrist, the way a person wears it who does not want the shine of a dial to give her away in low light. She read the time. She settled her weight. She looked at the tower and at the barrier and at the reader. And she waited. Hale set his cup down. "Nobody waits like that," he said. "To no one." And the words fogged the glass. The barrier threw a fault at 0719. A box truck rolled up to the vehicle lane, a scheduled delivery, and the final denial barrier, the heavy steel wedge that could stop a loaded truck at speed, hitched on its way down and hung there, half-seated, its hydraulics groaning. A light on the control panel went from green to amber. 2 young defenders converged on it. Voices climbed. The truck driver leaned out his window. The morning, which had been running on rails, wobbled. The woman at the pedestrian lane watched the whole sequence without moving her feet. She had already counted it. The tower's scan cycle ran 11 seconds, corner to corner, and she had timed it twice. The barrier cycled every 90 seconds under normal load, faster when they overrode it, and she had timed that too. She knew, standing flat-footed behind a painted line with no badge and no business, more about the rhythm of this gate than the airmen running it did. One of them, a kid who could not have been long out of technical training, froze at the panel with his hand hovering, unsure whether to clear the truck or reset the barrier first. He looked, for one bad second, like a person about to do the wrong thing quickly instead of the right thing slowly. "Reset the hydraulics before you clear him," the woman said. Quiet. Even. Not an order. Just precision, laid down on the ground where he could pick it up. Barrier first, then the truck. The kid did it without thinking, because it was correct, and it was said in the voice of a person to whom correct things happened. The wedge seated with a clunk. The light went green. The truck rolled. The morning found its rails again. Nobody thanked her. Nobody registered it at all, except 2 people. Hale, in the shack, who came up out of his chair, and a young airman first class named Lena Prescott, 20 years old, working the pedestrian lane, who had heard a woman with no badge use the phrase priorities of work, like it lived in her mouth. Prescott did a small thing then. She found a folding stool behind the shack, and a cold bottle of water from the cooler, and she brought them out to the line, and she set them down beside the waiting woman. "It's going to be a while, ma'am," Prescott said. "Convoy's got us locked down. Sit if you want." "Thank you," the woman said. She did not sit, but she took the water, and she looked at the young airman with something that was almost warmth, and she said, "You didn't have to do that." "My Gramps was a defender," Prescott said, coloring. "He always said the gate's still got to be human." The woman's eyes moved, just her eyes, to the Overwatch tower, and tracked its slow scan, and came back. 11 seconds. On the mark. There was more if you knew how to see it, and Hale was beginning to. She had placed herself, without ever seeming to move, at the one spot on the pedestrian lane, the tower's arc covered longest, and the barrier's blast geometry covered best. A person waiting idly stands where their feet happen to stop. This woman stood where she would want to stand if the morning went wrong, where the concrete itself told her to stand. She had read the gate for its threats the moment she arrived, and set her boots in the safest square of it, out of a habit so old it no longer looked like thought. She had counted the defenders too. 2 in the tower on rotation, 4 on the lanes, 1 on the barrier, the flight chief in the shack. She had clocked which of them swept their sectors and which of them drifted toward their phones. She knew, already, which airman would hold in a bad minute and which would freeze, and she was right about all of them, because being right about that had been the work of her life. And the one she had marked as the one who would hold was the same one who had ordered her to wait behind a line. The young man with the flat, certain voice and the memorized orders, who had no idea he had already passed the first test simply by refusing to bend for a face that didn't fit. Hale came out of the shack then, unhurried, hands in his pockets, the picture of a man taking the morning air. He stopped a comfortable distance from her and looked out at the barrier as if it were the only thing on his mind. "Long wait," he said. "I've had longer." "You got a name, ma'am? For when your sponsor calls?" "Calloway," she said. "Just the surname. No rank. No hint of one." She offered it the way you hand over a single card face down. Hale nodded slowly and looked at her a moment longer than was polite, and then he walked back to the shack, and he walked slower than he had walked out. Because the woman at his line knew his gait better than his newest airman did, and he could not, for the life of him, say why that scared him. By 0740, the gate was busy and the gate was impatient, and impatience runs downhill. It started with an airman waiting on a ride who saw the woman standing there with her canvas bag and her turned-in watch and decided she was funny. "Roster ghost," he said, to the airman beside him, tipping his chin at her. "She's been here an hour. No badge, no ride, no nothing. Roster ghost." A couple of them laughed. One lifted a phone, angled it, thought better of it, put it down. Maddox did not laugh, but he did not stop it either. He came over because the joke had made the woman his problem again, and he stood in front of her with the flat certainty of a young man doing exactly what the rules told him to do. "No sponsor, no badge, no appointment," he said. "That's 3 no's, ma'am. I can't help you. You should call for a ride and clear the gate area." "All right," Calloway said. She did not call for a ride. Rain. Again. 2004. A forward air base at the ragged edge of a war, and a first lieutenant 28 years old standing in the wet on an entry control point with the radio traffic climbing in her ear. A vehicle at the far bollards that would not stop. A young airman named Cole Bannister on the barrier, with his hand on the control and his eyes on hers, waiting for the word. The word she gave. The word that held the gate and cost what it cost. Here. Now. 22 years and half a world away. A corporal's insult slid off her like water off steel and left the no mark. She had been called worse by better. She had been called nothing at all by men whose lives she was, at that moment, saving. A nickname at a gate did not reach her. Nothing at a gate reached her anymore, except the gate itself. Prescott came back, red to the ears. "I'm sorry, ma'am. That was... They shouldn't have. That's not the gate." "You did nothing wrong," Calloway said. "Neither did he, mostly." She glanced at Maddox's back. "He's holding the line. That's the job." Prescott didn't understand that, and it showed, and Calloway let it go. The mockery cost her nothing because she had a scale for it, and a nickname did not register on the scale. She had stood in a formation once and heard a general she admired call her the finest young gate officer he had served with, and she had felt almost nothing, because praise did not register either. What registered was the gate. Only ever the gate. Whether it held. Whether the person on it would hold. Everything else. The insult, the laugh, the phone half raised and lowered, the boredom of men with somewhere better to be, was weather. And she had learned to stand in weather a long time ago, on a night that taught her exactly how little weather matters when the thing in the dark finally comes. An airman near the shack said something else, lower, and got an elbow from the man beside him, and the joke died on its own, the way small cruelties do when the person they are aimed at refuses to feed them. She gave them nothing to push against. A shove needs a wall. She was water. They gave up and looked at their phones and forgot her, which was, though none of them knew it, precisely the mercy she was extending to them. The chance to be forgotten, too, later, when the report was written. A staff car turned onto the approach road, far out, and slowed at the outer checkpoint. Calloway watched it the way she watched everything, early and without hope and without fear. Just watching. Just reading. Here is a thing worth saying plainly before the gate turns, because it is the whole reason this story is worth your time. The people who get overlooked are rarely the people who are small. More often, they are the people who have stopped needing to be seen. If a story about someone standing quietly on the right side of a painted line, taking an insult she could end with a single word, is the kind of story that stays with you, the kind you were looking for tonight, then stay with it. Subscribe to Honor Tales and let the ones who were written off finish their walk, because this one is about to. The staff car cleared the outer point and came on toward the gate. Procedure closed around her the way water closes over a stone. The convoy package was inbound. The order came down the net. Clear the gate area of all non-essential personnel, tighten access, log and resolve anything unusual. And the woman with no badge, standing at the pedestrian lane for the better part of an hour, refusing to leave, had become, in the exact language of the post orders, something unusual. Maddox pulled up an incident entry on the shack terminal. He was not cruel about it. He was worse than cruel from the gate's point of view. He was correct. Unidentified female, no credential. Declined lawful direction to depart. Loitering at an elevated force protection condition. He read it back to her, because that was procedure too, the courtesy of telling a person what you were writing about them. "I have to log you," he said, refusing lawful direction at the gate. "That's how this works." "I know exactly how it works, Senior Airman," Calloway said. And then, without heat, the way you'd correct a spelling. "Do it right." Something in the phrase caught Hale mid-keystroke in the shack. "Do it right." Not, "Do you know who I am?" Not, "I'll have your stripes." Do it right. He had heard generals talk. He had heard exactly two kinds of people say, "Do it right," and mean the gate more than themselves. And both of them wore stars, and neither of them ever got turned away anywhere. She used the words then, and that was the moment the floor tilted for the ones paying attention. Not a speech, just terms, dropped in passing, each one landing like a coin on stone. The current force protection condition, by its correct designation. The reader, called by its program name, not the slang. The final denial barrier, named exactly, and the reset sequence it wanted. She spoke the gate's own language, fluently, in an accent no lost contractor has ever had. Hale stopped writing, because there are tells a person cannot fake, and the deepest of them is not what a person does with their hands, but what they do with their words under mild official pressure, when they think no one important is listening. A liar reaches for size, titles, threats, names, dropped like coins on a counter. This woman reached for precision. She did not tell Maddox he was making a mistake. She told him, in the language of his own post orders, the exact procedure by which he might make one, and how to avoid it. And she did it without any apparent interest in whether he took the advice. That is not how a person behaves who wants something from a gate. That is how a person behaves who owns gates for a living and cannot switch it off. Hale had spent 29 years learning that language. He had taught it. And hearing it come out of a woman his newest airman had nicknamed the roster ghost, fluent, bored, exact, was like hearing his own mother tongue spoken by a stranger on the far side of the world. It did not reassure him. It did the opposite. Because the only people who spoke it that way, that easily, at a gate they had no badge for, were the people the whole machine of the base existed to serve, and one of them was standing behind a painted line, letting a 22-year-old decide her morning on purpose. 2004, the past thread ran, and this time it did not cut away early. The forward base, the complex attack opening in stages, a probe at the wire, then the vehicle, then the small arms fire meant to make the gate flinch at the wrong second. And on the entry control point, in command of it, holding it, a first lieutenant whose name the radio used again and again as the traffic peaked. Lieutenant Calloway, hold the barrier. Lieutenant Calloway, don't open that gate. She did not open the gate. The audience knew her now, even as the men at the present gate did not. An officer, a commander, a woman who had stood on the wrong side of a barrier under fire and kept it shut with her own voice, while a nation's worth of procedure came down to one young airman's hand and one lieutenant's word. At the present gate, Maddox got the word to resolve her now. Run her or remove her. Clock ticking. Convoy inbound. He reached for the biometric scanner on the pedestal. Calloway rolled her sleeve back and offered her hand before he asked for it. Palm up. Steady. She had been waiting, this whole hour, behind this painted line, for exactly this. Not to be let in, to be read. Hale could not let it go, and Hale had a phone. He stepped into the back of the shack while Maddox squared away the scanner, and he called the command section on a line that did not go through the gate log. He kept his voice low. He asked a careful question, the kind a chief master sergeant with 29 years learns how to ask. Anything on the board this morning I don't know about? Any movement? Any inspection? A pause on the line. Then, Chief, you're not cleared for what's on the board this morning. That was the whole answer. That was all of it. Because there is only one reason a flight chief gets told he is not cleared, to know what is happening at his own gate. And it is not because nothing is happening. Hale set the phone down very gently, the way you set down a thing that might go off. 2004 again. And now the past ran its deepest length, uninterrupted, because the audience needed the whole weight of it. After the attack. After the gate held, and the sun came up gray over a base that was still standing, because it did not fall. A memorial in a plywood chapel. A first lieutenant, 28 years old, with her arm in a sling and her airman in a flag-draped box, making a promise she would spend the rest of her career keeping. Cole Bannister had been 21. He had stood on the barrier because she told him to, and he had kept it shut because he was trained to and because he was brave, and the standoff distance had held because of where he stood, and he had not walked away from it. The gate did not fall. The people behind it lived, and a young officer learned, in the worst possible classroom, that a base is exactly as strong as the youngest person standing on its front door at the worst possible minute. And not one bit stronger. She made her promise at the plywood altar. Never again would she trust a gate to luck, only to a defender, trained and tested, and hard enough to hold it against anyone. Even a general. Especially a general. That was why she was here. That was why she came on foot, unbadged, unannounced, and let a 22-year-old order her to wait behind a line. She had not come to enter the base. She had come to find out whether the young man on the gate would hold it against a stranger who looked like nothing and had no papers and would not leave. So far, he had. She had kept the promise longer than most marriages last, 22 years of it. She had walked up to gates in the desert, and gates in the snow, and gates at 3 in the morning when the only light was the sodium wash of the lot, and she had been turned away, and cursed at quietly, and once nearly detained, and every single time she had felt the same thing when a young defender held the line against her, a fierce, private gladness, close to grief, that the gate would hold, that the next Bannister would not have to die because the person beside him folded. She did not do it to catch people failing. She did it to catch them holding. The failures she corrected and forgot. The ones who held she remembered by name for the rest of her life, and there were far more of them than the cynics ever believed. This morning's defender was holding. He had been holding for an hour. He had held through boredom and through his own men's laughter and through the temptation, which every gate guard feels, to make an inconvenient person into somebody else's problem. He had not made her somebody else's problem. He had made her his and kept her his, exactly the way the post orders said. And Sabine Calloway stood behind his line and felt the old fierce gladness rising and let it, and gave none of it to her face. At the present gate, she caught Hale's eye through the glass. She had watched him make his call. She had watched the answer land on his face, and she gave him the smallest thing, a nod, one professional to another, the nod that says, "I see that you see." He understood, in that instant, that he was being graded too, that the whole gate was, that the woman on the wrong side of the line was the most dangerous kind of inspector there is, the kind who shows you nothing and misses nothing. If you have ever been underestimated by people who had every reason to look closer and simply didn't, if you know what it is to be read wrong by a room and to say nothing because the truth was going to arrive on its own schedule, then you already know what the scanner is about to say, and you already know it is going to cost somebody something. Stay for it. Subscribe and see what the gate finds out. Hale keyed his radio. Then he stopped himself, thumb on the button, and let it go. Not his call. The truth had to come through the gate the right way, through the scanner, through the young defender's own two hands. Let the past have its whole hour now, start to finish, because everything the present gate is about to feel, this is where it comes from. 2004, the forward air base, 0200 and the base asleep behind its wire, and Lieutenant Sabine Calloway walking her entry control point in the dark because she could not sleep and did not try. 28 years old, 6 years in the uniform, a security forces officer who had wanted, since she was a girl, to be the one standing between the people asleep and the thing in the dark. The night went wrong in the way bad nights do, slowly, then all at once. A probe at the far wire, a burst of fire meant to pull attention left. Calloway did not go left. She read it for what it was, a feint, and she put her eyes right on the approach road, on the dark, beyond the bollards, and she was looking at exactly the right patch of black when the headlights came on, and the engine roared, and the vehicle came for the gate. "Barrier," she said into the radio. Calm, because calm was the only thing she had to give that would help. "Drop it. Bannister, hold the lane. Do not open." Senior Airman Cole. Bannister, 21 years old, on the control for the final denial barrier, dropped the wedge and held his post in the open with the thing bearing down. Because moving would have meant leaving the control, and leaving the control would have meant the barrier came back up, and the barrier coming up would have meant the gate fell. "Gate stays shut, LT," Bannister said. His voice did not shake. "I've got it." The seconds after that were the longest of her life, and she remembered every one of them. The engine note climbing, the headlights swelling white, the radio in her ear, someone at the operations center calling for a status she could not stop to give. She remembered the taste of the rain and the weight of her own weapon and the terrible arithmetic running behind her eyes. Stand-off distance, the barrier's rated stopping mass, the number of sleeping people in the barracks 100 meters back. She had run that arithmetic in training 1,000 times. She ran it once for real, in under 3 seconds, in the dark, and the answer was the answer it had always been. The barrier holds the line, and the person on the barrier does not leave it, or the gate falls. She keyed the net one more time and heard her own voice come out level, and she has wondered ever since where that levelness came from, because inside, She was 28 years old and terrified. "Hold," she said. "Hold the line." And a 21-year-old with his whole life ahead of him answered her the way she would answer for the rest of hers, and held, and the line held with him. He had it. The barrier held. The standoff distance, the hard, unglamorous math of how far a thing has to be stopped from the thing it wants to destroy, held because of exactly where he stood and exactly when he stood there. The gate did not fall. The base behind it did not burn. Hundreds of people woke up the next morning and never knew how close the dark had come, because the youngest man on the front door held the line and did not walk away from it. And it cost what holding costs sometimes. Cole Bannister did not come off the barrier. Calloway held the gate the rest of that night with a wound she did not report until dawn, because the gate was not secure, and a commander does not leave a gate that is not secure. When the sun came up, she was still standing on it. She had kept it shut. She had lost an airman to keep it shut. Both of those things were true, and would always be true, and she carried both of them off that gate and had carried them every day since. At the plywood chapel, she made her vow. Not revenge. There was no one left to take it from. A discipline instead. She would spend the rest of her life making gates hard. She would train the young ones and test the young ones, and, when she had the rank, she would walk up to their gates herself, with no badge and no warning, and find out, before the dark did, whether they would hold. 22 years. 2 stars worth of career, one of them earned and pinned. 100 gates walked up to, unannounced, and every one of them the same single question, the only question she had ever really asked. Will the person on post hold? Past and present closed on one image, a young hand on a barrier control, in the rain, 22 years gone. A young hand on a scanner pedestal, in the gray morning light now. The same line on the ground. The same question. The story was one timeline now, and it was almost through the gate. At the present gate, Trevor Maddox committed all the way, and his committing was the trap the whole morning had been building. There was no cruelty left in him now. The joke was gone, the impatience was gone, and what was left was just the job, stripped to the bone. He had a woman with no credential at an elevated force protection condition with a convoy inbound, and the post orders were absolutely clear about what he was to do. And he was going to do it, and he was going to do it right, because that was the only thing a gate is for. "Whatever comes back, ma'am," he said, and he met her eyes when he said it. "I act on it. No exceptions. If the system says you're not cleared, you don't come in. Not for anybody." "Good," Calloway said. And there, for the first time in an hour, in the whole long, cold morning, the corner of her mouth moved. Not quite a smile, the ghost of one, the look of a person watching someone do the hard right thing under pressure, which was the only thing in the world that had ever made her happy. "Not for anybody." She placed her hand on the reader. Steady. Her stillness total, her breathing metered, her eyes level on the young man's face and not on the screen, because she already knew what the screen would say, and she wanted to watch him instead. She had crossed 100 gates. She had never once wanted a gate to work more than she wanted this one to. She thought, in that suspended moment with her palm flat on the cold reader, of all the gates that had come before this one, the ones that folded. A lieutenant colonel's aide who had waved her through on the strength of her bearing alone, without a single check, and how she had failed him on the spot and watched his face fall and known she had probably saved a life somewhere down the line by doing it. The gates that held. A corporal in the snow who had made a 2-star general stand in the cold for 40 minutes rather than bend a rule, and how she had written that corporal up for a commendation with something close to joy. She kept them all. She was keeping this one already, watching the young man's jaw set, watching his thumb hover honest over the deny key, watching him get ready to turn away a woman who had done nothing but wait, because the system had not yet told him he could let her in. He would act on what the system said. He had told her so, and she believed him, and belief was the rarest thing she carried and the only thing she had ever really been hunting. Hale moved. He came out of the shack and around the pedestal and set himself where he could see the screen, jaw tight, because he had done the arithmetic, and he knew what was coming, and he could not stop it. And, he realized, standing there, he did not want to. Let it come the right way. Let the boy read her with his own hands. The pedestal woke. The reader pulled her credential and reached back into systems that most of the people on that base did not know existed. The progress bar climbed. 11 seconds, the tower's scan cycle, ticking somewhere in the corner of everyone's attention. The bar climbed. Maddox's thumb hovered over the deny key, ready, dutiful, certain. The field went red. Not the ordinary red of a failed scan. Not the flat denial a lost contractor earns. The screen threw a designation Trevor Maddox had never seen in 22 years of life, or 2 years on the gate. A restricted special access code, a string of characters that his terminal was barely authorized to display, and beneath it, a single directive in hard white letters that did not ask and didn't explain. Verify identity with senior installation. Authority. Do not detain. Do not deny. His face did the whole journey in about 4 seconds, and every step of it showed. Confusion first. A code he didn't know. A directive that made no sense at a pedestrian lane. Then disbelief as the size of the thing began to register, as the terminal itself seemed to sit up straight. Then the beginning of recognition, the cold spread of it, as he looked from the screen to the woman who had offered her hand, palm up and waited an hour behind a painted line, and told him, quietly, to do it right. Then horror. He did not know the code. That was the first thing, and it was almost the worst thing, because a defender is trained to act on what the system tells him, and the system had just told him something in a language he did not speak. His hand pulled back from the deny key as if the pedestal had gone hot. He looked at the screen, and at the woman, and at the screen, and the terrible symmetry of it began to assemble itself in his mind. The hour of waiting, the offered hand, the do it right, the not for anybody, and her almost smile when he said it. She had wanted him to run her. She had stood there and made herself into exactly the kind of person the gate exists to stop, and then she had put her hand on his scanner and dared his own procedure to catch her, and it had, and the catching was the whole point. Somewhere behind him Hale said very quietly, "Oh, airman," the way a man says it when he has watched a young person walk all the way to the edge of a thing, and only now sees them realize how far down it goes. It was not a rebuke. It was almost tender. Hale had known for half an hour, and Maddox had known for 4 seconds, and the distance between those two facts was the distance between a chief and a kid, and there was nothing to be done about it, but let the kid feel the whole drop. The gate's own systems did not wait for him. The special access flag pinged the command section and the provost marshal in the same second, and the answer to those pings did not walk to the gate. It ran. A security forces vehicle came off the pad with its light bar going, and behind it, on foot, moving fast for a man his age, came Colonel Aaron Fletcher, 51 years old, the Mission Support Group commander, who had been pulled out of a briefing by 3 words he never expected to hear about his own front gate. Fletcher reached the pedestrian lane at a near run and saw her, and stopped as if he'd hit the barrier himself. "General Calloway," his voice cracked on it. He came to attention there on the cold concrete, in front of his own defenders, in front of the box truck driver, in front of God, and the morning. "Ma'am, the gate didn't know you were coming. Nobody told us you were—" "That was the point, Colonel," Calloway said, gently. "Nobody's supposed to tell you." Behind the pedestal, Chief Master Sergeant Corwin Hale let out a breath he felt like he'd been holding for an hour, and he came to attention with everything 29 years had left in him, because he had known since she checked a watch she wore turned inward, and knowing had not made this moment any smaller. Word moved through the gate the way current moves through water. Fast, silent, total. The box truck driver, idling in the vehicle lane, took his hands off the wheel and set them in his lap without quite knowing why. The airman who had coined Roster Ghost went the color of ash and found something urgent to do with his eyes. Prescott pressed her lips together and stood the straightest she had ever stood in her life, because the woman she had shown that small mercy to was wearing a star she couldn't see. And the mercy, it turned out, had been the right instinct all along. The provost marshal arrived a half-step behind Fletcher, a hard-faced major who had run gates his whole career, and even he pulled up short. He had read the same flag on his own device on the way over. He knew what it meant. He knew there was exactly one correct posture for everyone at that gate now, and he took it. And around the pedestrian lane, a small, ragged line of airmen came to attention one by one as the understanding rippled outward. Not because anyone called it, but because some facts, when they land, arrange a room all by themselves. Sabine Calloway stood in the center of all of it, exactly as she had stood for the past hour. Still, unbothered, entirely at ease with time. She had not moved from behind the painted line. She would not, until the young man who had put her there released her from it. Because that was his gate, and his line, and, for one more minute, his call. The most senior officer at the gate was waiting on the most junior, on purpose, in front of everyone, and every defender who saw it would carry the picture for the rest of their careers. What it looks like when rank chooses to serve the line instead of stepping over it. And Trevor Maddox, 22 years old, senior airman, defender, the young man who owned the gate, came apart. It hit him all at once, the whole shape of it. The rank. 1 star. A general. The Inspector General of a numbered Air Force, the single most senior set of eyes that could ever land on a gate, standing at his pedestrian lane in travel clothes with a canvas bag. And under the rank, worse than the rank, the thing that took his legs. She had let him. She had a star in her pocket and a code on that screen that could open any door on the base, and she had stood behind his painted line for an hour and offered her hand to his scanner and let a 22-year-old run her like a stranger because she wanted to know if he would hold. His knees went. He dropped to one knee at the line, the exact line he had ordered her to wait behind. Not to grovel, not for show, but because the strength went out of him and the ground came up. His hand found the cold concrete. He looked up at her, and the words came out of him wrecked. "There's no way," he said it again, because the first time didn't hold it. "Ma'am, there's no way. I ordered you to wait. I logged you. I was about to deny you." You were," Calloway said. And then she did the thing that no one at that gate expected, the thing that turned the whole morning on its hinge. She reached down and offered him her hand, not the palm-up hand she'd given his scanner. A hand up. "Stand up, Senior Airman," she said. "You did it right." The finding was not a reckoning. That was the part the gate took longest to understand. Calloway got Maddox on his feet and stepped back and let the morning settle. And then she did what an inspector general actually comes to do, which is not to burn a gate down, but to read it true. She turned to Fletcher and to Hale, and she gave them her finding standing right there at the line, in plain words, so that every defender within earshot would carry it the rest of their careers. "Your gate held," she said. Elevated force protection condition, convoy inbound, and an unbadged stranger who would not leave and would not explain herself, and knew exactly which buttons to push to make a young airman doubt himself. And he did not bend. He followed his post orders against a woman who turned out to be a general because he could not know she was a general. And the not knowing is the entire point. A gate that only holds against strangers who look like strangers is not a gate. Yours held against one who didn't. That's the finding. Maddox stood at something close to attention, wrecked and upright at once, and took it. There was one correction, and she gave it to him herself, because it was the kind of correction that is worth a life. When the barrier had faulted at 0719, the reset sequence had gone a half beat out of order in the scramble. Truck cleared first in one defender's head before the wedge was fully seated. It had come right in time, but she had seen it, the way she saw everything, and she named it now, quiet and exact. Barrier first, then the vehicle, every time, under pressure especially. It's half a second. She let that sit. Half a second is the whole distance between a gate that holds and a gate that doesn't. I know exactly what half a second is worth. His name was Cole Bannister. Learn the sequence cold, and you'll never have to. If this is the moment it lands for you, the young man who did his duty and was honored for it instead of humiliated, the general who came to make the gate stronger and not to make anyone small, then you already understand what this channel is for. It is for the ones who hold the line when no one is looking, and the ones who come back quietly to make sure the line will hold. If that is your kind of story, subscribe to Honor Tales and stand a few more posts with us. She was not finished. She turned to Hale. Note the airman first class who brought a stranger a stool and a bottle of water and still checked her at the line. Prescott. That's not softness. That's a defender who remembers the gate is human and holds it anyway. I want her name in the good part of the report. Prescott, off to the side, went scarlet and stood very straight. There was a thing Calloway did then that no report would ever capture, and it was the truest thing she did all morning. She walked the length of the pedestrian lane once, slowly, with Maddox beside her, and she showed him his own gate through her eyes. Here is where the tower loses you for 2 seconds on its turn. Here is where a man who means the base harm would stand to use those 2 seconds. Here is the square of concrete you should never let an unknown occupy. And here, she stopped at the painted line, is the line. And the line is not paint. The line is a promise. Everyone behind it is asleep because you said you would hold it. She said it without weight, almost gently, the way a person teaches a thing they love to someone they have decided is worth teaching. And Trevor Maddox listened to a general explain his own gate to him and understood, maybe for the first time, what he had been standing on for 2 years. You held it against me, she said, and I am the hardest test that will ever walk up to this lane, because I came here trying to get in, and I had every right to be let through, and I made you doubt yourself on purpose. If you can hold it against me, you can hold it against the one who comes someday meaning it. That is why I do this. That is the whole reason. So that the person on the barrier at 0200 is one I already tested, and not one I am only hoping about. And then the coin. Calloway reached into the canvas bag, the bag a general had carried on foot, to a gate that told her to wait. And she took out a challenge coin, the Inspector General's coin, heavy and plain, and she pressed it into Trevor Maddox's palm and closed his fingers over it with both of her hands. Somewhere overseas, she said. There's a gate I haven't picked yet. Some cold morning it's going to tell me to wait outside, same as you did. I don't know where it is. I don't know who'll be standing on it. She held his eyes. I hope, when I get there, whoever's on that gate is exactly like you were this morning, Hold it against everybody, even the ones with stars in their pockets, especially them. She let his hand go. She walked out then, through the pedestrian lane she had been told to wait behind, and at the painted line she stopped. One beat, and she stepped over it deliberately, the way a person steps over a grave they have made their peace with, and she said one name so quietly that only the line heard it. Bannister. Then she was through, and the morning had her. The staff car that had waited at the outer point rolled up for her at last, and she got in, and it pulled away toward the flight line, unhurried, a plain sedan carrying a plain woman who had turned out to be the whole reason the gate would be a little harder tomorrow than it was today. Trevor Maddox stood at the line with the coin warm in his fist. He did not watch the car go. He turned back to his gate, and he squared himself to it, and he held it, exactly right, against anybody, for the rest of a shift that felt entirely different than the one he had started. Every soldier carries a story that few ever hear. Listen with your heart. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to Honor Tales for more.